In 1917, in a mountain town called Hot Springs, North Carolina, more than 2,000 German sailors were interned inside a luxury spa hotel. Out of scrap lumber and flattened tin cans, they built a miniature German village on the hotel lawn, a chapel with a spire, and a working carousel that played music as it turned. That is where this list begins. Hot Springs is in the Smoky Mountains, and it is not the strangest story we found there. That place makes this list. So do 9 others. A Wild West town rotting on a mountaintop with no road to it. A boulder in a pasture carved with 1,500 marks nobody can read. Make sure you stick with us to the end, because that story is number 1. A road that runs 7 miles into a national park and ends inside a tunnel that opens onto nothing. This channel is about the places that got left off the map. Subscribe if that is your kind of thing. Today, we are counting down 10 things the Smoky Mountains are hiding. Number 10. The Museum of Salt and Pepper Shakers and the Woman Who Could Not Stop. In the 1980 seconds, a Belgian-born archaeologist named Andrea Ludden went looking for a pepper mill. She bought one, then she bought another. Archaeologists are trained to find meaning in ordinary discarded objects, and she never really switched that off. Her son bought her a digital camera so she could catalog what she had, which only accelerated things. By 2001, the collection had taken over the family house in Texas, including the bedroom. Her husband Rolf kept building shelves, and he has described the feeling that the family was living with the Shakers rather than the other way around. Most people would have stopped. The Luddens moved states and opened a museum instead. It opened in Cosby, Tennessee in 2002, moved to a small commercial building outside the main strip in 2005, and now holds more than 20,000 pairs of shakers and about 1,500 pepper mills. Then, in 2010, she opened a second museum in Spain, holding another 20,000 pairs. The collection is now physically too large to exist inside one country. Andrea Ludden died in 2015. The doors are still open, run by her family, and you would drive past the building 100 times without ever guessing what one person's stubbornness looks like when you stack it floor to ceiling behind glass. Number 9. Deals, Gap, North Carolina, and the Tree Made of Wreckage. 11 miles of US 129 run along the southwestern boundary of Great Smoky Mountains National Park, following the valley of 20 Mile Creek. The ridges on either side are too steep to allow the road to be straightened, so it was simply laid down along whatever line the terrain permitted. There are no intersections, no driveways, and no side roads for the entire stretch. It is said to have 318 curves. Nobody planned this, the geography did it. Writers found it anyway. The name Tail of the Dragon attached itself around 1981, and the individual corners picked up names of their own. Copperhead Corner, Hog Pen Bend, Gravity Cavity, Breaker Bus Bend. Where there is a road like that, there are crashes. In the 1980 seconds, a group of Harley riders started nailing broken motorcycle parts to a tree in the parking lot, and what began as gallows humor hardened into a permanent shrine. Fairings, mirrors, body panels, all of it hung and layered. Every piece on that tree came off a vehicle that went down on the same 11 miles of road. Riders bolt their own wreckage to it voluntarily, and they often sign it first. The road is open year-round, and the tree is still standing in the lot, growing. It is the only memorial we found that people contribute to by surviving. Number 8. Judaculla Rock in Cullowhee, North Carolina. Off NC 17, past farmland, a narrow rural road, ends at a gravel pull-off with no ticket booth and no staff. In the pasture below sits a soapstone boulder, roughly 16 feet by 11, resting in a shallow bowl-shaped depression that people dug around it. It is covered in more than 1,500 carved marks. Around 1,458 of them are simple cut marks. The rest are rings, cross and circle, motifs, animal tracks, and stick figures. Nobody can read them. This was never built as a monument. It started as a workshop. Soapstone is soft enough to carve with hand tools, and people came here to quarry it for bowls and vessels, beginning roughly 3,500 years ago. Somewhere across that long occupation, the quarrying turned into marking, layer over layer across different cultural periods. Estimates for the carvings themselves run from about 200 CE to 1400 CE. Nobody left a key. By the time Cherokee oral tradition recorded it, the boulder belonged to Jutakula. Tzolkalu, the slant-eyed master of game, who owned every animal in these mountains and whose permission was needed to hunt them. Researchers at Western Carolina University identified the name Cullowhee itself as an anglicized form of Judacullowhee, Judakula's place. The rock sits on an old trail that linked the Cherokee townhouse there with Judakula's own townhouse at Tennessee Bold. Tradition holds the giant landed on the rock while leaping between mountains and left a handprint. It is on the lower right-hand side, and visitors still find it. 7 fingers, because Judakula had 7 fingers on each hand and 7 toes on each foot. The Cherokee were forcibly removed from this region in 1838. The rock was added to the National Register in 2013 and Jackson County now owns it. Free to visit, protected by a boardwalk. The carvings are almost invisible in flat daylight and surface when the stone is wet, which means the whole thing depends on catching it at the right hour. Number 7. There is a fully built Wild West town collapsing on top of a mountain in Maggie Valley, North Carolina, and there has never been a road to it. Ghost Town in the Sky opened on May 1, 1961. A businessman named R.B. Coburn had traveled the American West, looked at real ghost towns, and decided to build one deliberately on a summit at roughly 4,600 feet so that getting up there was part of the attraction. He marketed it as North Carolina's mile-high theme park. 3 themed areas sat at 3 different elevations: Indian Village, Mountain Town, Mining Town. A steel roller coaster called the Red Devil opened in 1988. The only ways up were a double-inclined railway and a chairlift added in 1962, which at capacity moved around 1,200 people an hour. The railway itself is the detail people remember. To build it, crews strapped a 25-ton bulldozer to a winch and dragged it up the mountainside using a second bulldozer. The finished line climbed slopes ranging from 30 to 77 degrees. That design made the park famous, and then it killed it. With no road, every mechanical failure was a total failure. No lift meant no visitors, no revenue, and no way to get repair equipment to the top. Coburn spent heavily keeping both running. After the property changed hands in the 1,970 seconds, maintenance slipped. On the 16th of July 2002, the chairlift stopped with passengers on it, in the open, for more than 2 hours. Within days, the owner closed the park and put it up for sale. There were reopening attempts. Then, in February 2010, a retaining wall failed and the resulting mudslide forced around 40 homes below to evacuate. It is closed, posted, and enforced. The false front saloon and jail and church are still up there, folding in on themselves with the chairlift towers running down the slope. You can stand in the parking lot on US 19 and look straight up at a town you are not allowed to reach. Number 6. Cataloochee Valley, North Carolina. A broad, flat valley ringed by 6,000-foot peaks, reachable now by a narrow gravel road off I-40 with drop-offs and no cell signal. In 1910, roughly 1,200 people lived here. It was the largest and most prosperous settlement in what became Great Smoky Mountains National Park, apple orchards, 2 churches, a school, and a small trade-boarding fisherman who came up for the season. It was not a failing community. It was removed anyway when the park was assembled in the 1,930 seconds. Then it sat empty for 70 years. The Park Service kept the meadows mown and maintained the buildings. As exhibits of a way of life, the park itself had ended. In the 1,990 seconds, conservation groups approached the park about bringing back elk. the last elk in North Carolina, is believed to have been killed by the late 1700 seconds. Cataloochee was chosen precisely because it had been emptied, remote, undeveloped, and covered in open grazing meadow. In February 2001, 25 elk from land between the lakes were released here. 27 more followed in 2002. From Alberta, planned releases in 2003 were suspended over disease concerns, and the experiment ran until 2008 before full reintroduction was approved. The regional population is now estimated at more than 200 animals. Here is the part that stops people. The meadows those elk graze are not natural clearings. They are the farm fields of the families who were moved out, kept open for 80 years by the government that moved them. And when the crates were opened in 2001, roughly 900 people were standing in those fields watching, including descendants of the people who had cleared them. Palmer Chapel and the Beech Grove School still stand alone in the grass, and you can walk inside both. In autumn, the bulls bugle at dawn and dusk, a high, strange whistle that carries the length of the valley. It is somebody's old pasture, and something enormous is standing in it that has not been here since before the farm existed. Number 5. When the government emptied the Smokies, the Walker sisters simply refused to go. Congress authorized the park in 1926, and North Carolina and Tennessee began buying up nearly 500,000 acres of privately owned land. Most families sold and left. The unmarried Walker sisters, living in a 2-part log cabin in Little Greenbrier Cove that their father had built onto, and that dated back to the 1842, stayed put. In 1933, the Park Commission tried to persuade them to sell and failed. The commission had the legal power to condemn the property and force them out. It refused to use it. Forcibly evicting a household of elderly mountain women would have been a disaster for a park being sold to the country as preserved Appalachia. So the government negotiated. The early 1942, the sisters sold around 122 acres for roughly $4,750 in exchange for a lifetime lease. Inside the boundary, they could no longer hunt, fish, cut wood, or graze livestock, which was the entire basis of the self-sufficient life they had held out to protect. They adapted by selling to tourists, fried apple pies, crocheted doilies, children's toys, and Louise's handwritten poems. In April 1946, the Saturday Evening Post ran an article on them. The park put up a highway sign directing visitors to the farm, and the visitors came by 1951. 3 sisters had died, and only 2 were left. Margaret was 82, and Louisa was 70, and they wrote to the park superintendent asking him to take the visitors' welcome sign back down. They could not run the farm and entertain the tourists the park had sent them. Margaret died in 1962. Louisa lived in the cabin until 1964. The cabin, the corn crib, and the spring house are still there, a mile and a half up a trail with no road access. And the clearing they spent their lives holding open is quietly closing in around them. We opened this video with hot springs, and that story is number 4, coming up next. Let us know in the comments whether that one caught you off guard. If you are enjoying the deep dive so far, a thumbs up genuinely helps more people find these stories. Number 4. Hot Springs, North Carolina. Population 520. A tight river valley where Spring Creek meets the French Broad, walled in by steep ridges. It has the only known hot spring in the state, and in the 19th century that made it a destination. The Mountain Park Hotel had 200 rooms, 16 marble bathing pools, croquet and tennis lawns, and the first organized golf club in the Southeast. By 1917, it was dying. The spa boom had faded a flood. The year before had damaged the property, and the war had killed what tourism remained. So the owner, James Rumbo, negotiated a contract with the War Department to fill his empty hotel with detainees. On the 8th of June 1917, the first of more than 2,000 Germans arrived by train. They were civilian merchant sailors whose ships had sheltered in American ports when the United States entered the war. Because they were not military, they could not legally be called prisoners of war. The government designated them enemy aliens instead. The town had roughly 650 residents. The camp quadrupled it overnight. The hotel had been built for around 300 guests, so roughly 36 additional buildings went up on the grounds, most of them constructed by the Germans themselves. Officers stayed in the hotel, crew in barracks on the lawn, and the women were given rooms in town. What nobody in Washington had anticipated was who these men were. Among them were engineers, artists, carpenters, chefs, intellectuals, and an entire German orchestra. Given a decaying resort and unlimited time, they rebuilt it. They cleaned out and restored the swimming pool, the tennis courts, the bowling alley, and the billiard room. They planted vegetable and flower gardens and raised rabbits. They ran classes in English, mathematics, and navigation. And out of scrap lumber, driftwood, and flattened cans, they built a small version of home on the hotel lawn, a chapel with a spire, sculptures of Neptune and mermaids, and a Tyrolean carousel that actually worked and played music as its chairs turned. Typhoid broke out and killed 18 of them. They are buried in Riverside Cemetery in Asheville. The camp closed after about 14 months. The remaining internees were shipped to Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, on the 30th of August 1918 and repatriated in September 1919. When the armistice was signed, the Guards celebrated by blowing up the village the internees had built. The hotel burned in 1920 and was never rebuilt. 2 later hotels on the site also burned. Nothing of the village survives. The town is a spa and an Appalachian Trail waypoint now, with the trail running down Bridge Street through the middle of it, and the only physical trace of any of this is a monument in Asheville and 18 graves. Number 3. Elkmont, Tennessee. The millionaire's ghost town. Elkmont was a Little River Lumber Company logging camp first. When the timber was cut, the company sold the leftover land. In 1910, it sold 50 acres to the Appalachian Club, a social club of Knoxville businessmen, who built a clubhouse and sold cottages to members. In 1912, a man named Charles B.C. Arter bought 65 acres for the Wonderland Club. The cottage street became known as Daisy Town. Other sections were called Millionaire's Row and Society Hill. For 2 decades, these were the good years, weekly dances with live music. The members dammed the river to make themselves a swimming hole. Here is where it turns. Those same men became the national park's most effective advocates. Colonel David Chapman, one of the campaign's leaders, brought legislators up to Elkmont specifically to sell them on the idea. And when the bill establishing the park was written, Elkmont was exempted from eminent domain. That exemption is the whole story. Ordinary mountain families across the Smokies were bought out and moved. The cottage owners at Elkmont negotiated leases instead, some for a few years, some for life. A private resort continued operating inside a national park for another 6 decades. The last cottages were occupied until 1992, when the final leases ran out. The Park Service inherited 74 buildings and an argument it could not win about which of them counted as history. While that argument dragged on, the Wonderland Hotel settled the question itself. Nobody demolished it and nobody burned it down. It sat unresolved through the debate and collapsed under its own weight in 2005. What was left on the site burned in 2017 in a suspected arson. The decision finally came in 2009-19. Structures preserved, the rest removed. Demolition finished in 2018. Daisy Town is freely accessible by day, and you can walk through the restored cabins. Along the Little River and Jake's Creek trails, stone chimneys stand alone where cottages used to be. And once a year in late May or early June, the ground here fills with Phodnus carolinus, one of at least 19 firefly species in the park and one of very few in the world that flash in unison. Since 2006, access has been restricted to an 8-day window. with parking awarded by public lottery. So the most exclusive address in the Smokies is still the most exclusive address in the Smokies. It just holds a lottery now, and the people it lets in are standing in the dark with their phones off. Number 2. 13 people live in Fontana Dam, North Carolina. They live at the base of the tallest dam in the eastern United States. It is 480 feet high, 2,365 feet long, and took almost 3 million cubic yards of concrete. There is a 6-story glass-walled powerhouse at the bottom of it, and the Appalachian Trail crosses directly over the top. The Tennessee Valley Authority had wanted this dam for years and could not get it. Alcoa controlled the land. Congress balked at the cost. The war solved both problems in 4 months. Alcoa transferred 15,000 acres to the federal government on the 14th of August, 1941. Congress authorized funding on the 17th of December, 9 days after Pearl Harbor. Construction began on the 1st of January, 1942. What followed was a crash project in a place with no infrastructure. At peak, more than 6,000 people worked 3 shifts around the clock. 14 of them died. An entire town had to be conjured out of nothing alongside the dam. Hospital, schools, churches, stores, a theater, a cafeteria, a library, a bank, and a post office. Black workers and around 50 Cherokee employees were housed in segregated quarters. Getting there required clearing the valley first. The project bought 68,292 acres and relocated 1,311 families, 1,047 graves, and more than 60 miles of road. Once the families were out, TVA burned and demolished the houses and barns so nobody could come back. Here is what makes this one different. Those families were told what the dam was for. They were told it was aluminium, that the power was going to Alcoa's plants in Tennessee to build aircraft. That was true, and it was not the whole truth. The power was also going to the Clinton Engineer Works at Oak Ridge, where uranium was being enriched for the atomic bomb, and that was a guarded secret. The workers did not know either. One man who worked on the project said years later that they had no idea part of that electricity was going to Oak Ridge for the bomb. The dam was finished in November 1944 and started producing power in early 1945. The company town is still there. It operates as a resort now, and the guest cabins are the original workers' houses. The school, the stores, and the hospital buildings survive. The children who grew up on that construction site formed an association called the Dam Kids, and they still hold reunions. 13 year-round residents in a place where 7,000 people once worked around the clock on something none of them were allowed to understand. Number 1. Proctor and the North Shore. You drive out of Bryson City on a 2-lane road that climbs into the trees and keeps climbing. The pavement is smooth and recently laid. There are no houses, no side roads, no mailboxes, no signs of anyone. After about 7 miles, the road widens into a small loop and then stops at the mouth of a tunnel cut into the hillside. Inside, the walls are covered in graffiti and the air goes cold. It runs about 1/4 of a mile, and there is daylight at the far end. You walk through and come out into forest. No town, no junction, nothing the road was ever going toward. Locals call it the road to nowhere. There is a sign at the entrance that calls it a broken promise, dated 1943, followed by a question mark. Here is what the road was supposed to reach. Proctor was a lumber town on Hazel Creek, named for Moses Proctor, the first European-American settler up that valley around 1830. It boomed when Ritter Lumber pushed a railroad up the creek in the early 1900 seconds. Homes, a school, a church, a post office. Hazel Creek was also where Horace Kefart lived, the writer more responsible than anyone for the national park's existence. Then Fontana Dam was completed in 1944 to power the aluminium plants and Oak Ridge, and the water came up. Proctor went under. So did NC 288, the only road serving the whole North Shore, which meant families were cut off not just from their homes, but from their dead. 26 cemeteries with over 1,000 graves sat on the far side of a new lake, with no way to reach them. So in 1943, the federal government put a promise in writing. A memorandum of agreement between TVA, the Interior Department, the state, and Swain County committed the government to build a replacement road along the North Shore, roughly 30 miles from Bryson City, toward Deals Gap. 2 decades passed before construction started in the 1,960 seconds. Then the mountain refused. Cutting into that particular rock released acid that killed fisheries in the streams below. The erosion was unmanageable, and costs climbed. The government stopped 7 miles in, at a tunnel that had already been bored, and walked away. Swain County argued about it for another 40 years. Demand the road, or take money instead. In 2007, they took the money, a $52 million settlement, formalized in February 2010, due in full by the end of 2020. They received $12.8 million, and then nothing. Congress did not appropriate the rest. The county sued the Interior Department in 2016, and the case was dismissed in 2017. The final $35.2 million was handed over in 2018, 75 years after the promise was made. Proctor is still down there. Most of it is underwater unless the lake is very low, but the cemetery sits above the line, along with one surviving house and the remains of the mill. There are no signs and no parking lots. You get there by boat, or by walking about 6 miles round trip up the Old Creek grade. And every year, the Park Service ferries descendants across Fontana Lake to decorate those graves. On the crossing, when the water is low enough, some of them say you can make out the tallest buildings of Proctor beneath the surface. They are still going back to a town that is not there, on a lake that covers it, because the road they were promised ends in a hole in a hill. There are more of these across the Smokies than we could fit. Drowned settlements, logging camps, whole valleys that only exist now as chimneys in the woods. My own favorite is Elkmont, because it is the rare story where the people who wrote the rules had to live under them eventually. Which one caught you off guard, and which one did we miss? Subscribe, and we will keep finding them.